This is the Floridays shawl being modeled by a lattice that my husband made. And next I'm going to show you how I blocked it. I'm finally blocking my Floridays shawl, which, as you can see, is rather large. It's about 5 or 6 feet across and about half that length from the top to the bottom. I'll give you the exact dimensions later on. As you can see, this particular shawl has a fairly solid looking center triangle and then a lacy edge. And I'm going to turn the camera off and then get a little closer so you can see the detail. Now I'm going to show you the construction of the shawl and show you some details as we go along. Let me pull out this pin. We have here on the shawl, as I said, a garter stitch portion, and if you look at this carefully you can see this really is garter stitch. Then we have these eyelets here. What I do when I start is I cast on very few stitches, and in general on each row what I do is on even rows I knit one, yarn over, knit all the way across, get just before a pillar stitch, which I mark with a safety pin actually so that I can see it, work a yarn over, knit, work a yarn over, knit all the way across until I have one stitch left, yarn over and knit that. Then I come back and just knit all stitches. As I go along, this eventually forms actually some small holes on the edge which you can barely see because they end up compressed. But you see these eyelet holes on either side of a pillar stitch that happen because I've knit into the eyelet. This tends to form, if done in garter stitch, a right triangle here and a right triangle here. So what we end up with is two right triangles, which mean the whole shawl is more or less a right triangle. This is, of course, approximate and depends a little bit on your row gauge. But with garter stitch, when this blocks out, you can easily make it 45 degrees or change it a little bit if you want. Now I'm going to show you the point. Down here, I have a lacy area that also has some increases. I'm not going to discuss how exactly I work these increases. It's very similar to the increases that we had along the pillar stitch, but actually I have to increase every row because these tend to elongate, and if I don't want this to distort too much, I need to just increase at a slightly greater rate. I'll describe that a little bit later. Here I'm showing the detail of what is a lacy stitch. This isn't actually a true lace. It's a traditional Scandinavian pattern, and it consists of a row of eyelets. On the row of eyelets when I first start, what I do is I knit into a stitch, I form a yarn over. I knit into a stitch, I form a yarn over. So if I'd had 10 stitches on a row, when I finish that row, the next row with the eyelets, I'll have 10 stitches plus an almost equal number of eyelets in there. On the next row when I come back, I just knit the eyelet and the stitch together, and that forms this nice decorative lace row of holes, which is very pretty. Then knit a few rows of garter stitch, which beginners all learn, and afterwards I do something called the long stitch, which I'll show you a web page where I show exactly how I did that, and twist it on the next row. But this makes some very pretty stitches, which I'll try and get a close-up of. I'm not sure I can do that. That are sort of twisted and turn on their sides. And then repeat some garter stitch, make some more eyelets, repeat some more long stitches, and I make pretty much 3 rows of long stitches, and I repeat that as long as I think it should be pretty. It's possible that a whole shawl of nothing but these would be very beautiful too, but it's easier to do a mindless solid portion and then use this as a trim. Now you'll see in blocking this, you'll notice that all around my shawl, when you pulled back, I had strung through this red thread, which happens to be some red machine knitting yarn that I had put through here. And I just threaded a tapestry needle and went through every now and then with a blunt tapestry needle so that I would be able to take these pins, pull on the thread, and pull this shawl out. What I really did while blocking is I first took the shawl, put it in a bucket of water with some soap, and then rinsed it. Then put it in a lingerie bag and spun it dry, took it out, and just dropped it on this tablecloth out here outside. I then spread it out by hand, trying to give it more or less a shape, But by putting this thread through the edges, I was able to pin it out and draw it out quite nicely. It takes a little while, but it's fun to sit out in the sun, and it turns out the cats came out and played with me while I did it. And I just work out, pulling it out from the center, smoothing it, and placing the pins where I want until I have it in a nice shape. One thing that did happen, though, is when I started this project, I was in the sun. And the shawl, being made out of a very, very fine gauge wool silk blend, dried very, very quickly. This particular yarn I bought for machine knitting, and it is maybe knit at maybe 8 stitches an inch, and even at that it's quite loose, so it dries very quickly. When you're blocking wool and silk, usually if you just dampen it and let it dry, it will hold its shape rather well. So what you want to do is get it blocked like this and then let it dry. Now the difficulty out in the sun is that something this thin dries very quickly. So sometimes it will still remain fairly blocked because you pulled it out. But I'm not always very sure, so what I do to solve the problem of not being sure that the blocking is going to stay is I get myself a handy spritz bottle. There you go. And I spray all over. Then I let it dry. And it will keep its shape rather well. With some other yarns like acrylic, you might want to steam block it, but if you want to steam block acrylic, you have to be very careful, and it's best to find an experienced machine knitter who has some steaming equipment to give you some advice on doing that so that you don't ruin the acrylic, because steam blocking acrylic, you get on the border of doing something that melts the acrylic and getting it to set in place. So it takes some practice and skill, and you might want to find a machine knitter. Anyway, this is pretty much the shawl. I'm going to pull back in a second and give you another view. There it is. Bye.